The first time Daniel Miller saw the man who killed his wife, he was sitting 3 rows behind him in a cramped county hearing room. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making everything look washed out and tired. At the front, a polished man in a navy suit adjusted his tie while a clerk read off case numbers. Next to him sat a young woman with a swollen belly and a metal brace on her leg, fingers clenched around the arms of a plastic chair. The nameplate in front of the man read, "Victor Crane Property Owner." The file in the clerk's hand said, "Petition to remove tenant on safety grounds." But Daniel knew the truth. Those safety grounds were the same rotten wiring and blocked fire exits that had turned his old apartment into a furnace 3 years earlier. The same corner cutting that had left his wife under a sheet, while Victor's lawyers called it an unfortunate accident. Now Victor was leaning toward the judge, voice smooth as glass, saying, "Your Honor, this building isn't suitable for someone in her condition. I'm only thinking of her unborn child." The woman beside him stared at the table cheeks, wet, too scared to speak. Daniel felt his hands start to shake. He hadn't planned to say anything, but when Victor added, "There are families who would gladly take a baby like hers," something in Daniel snapped. He stood up so fast his chair scraped the linoleum. "That's not concern," he heard himself say, voice rough and loud in the quiet room. "That's the same man whose building burned my wife alive. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world." Daniel Miller was 35 years old, and most days he felt twice that. He lived on the edge of Cincinnati, in a faded 2-bedroom rental that rattled every time a semi rolled by on the highway. By day, he loaded pallets and drove a forklift at a warehouse that shipped other people's comforts all over the country. By night, he packed school lunches, checked 4th grade homework, and tried to pretend he wasn't exhausted down to the bone. Once upon a time, he'd been a paramedic racing through the city with sirens screaming the guy people trusted in their worst moment. Back then, his wife Emily used to joke that he was addicted to saving strangers. Then a winter fire in a low-rent building took her and half their floor in under 12 minutes. The official report blamed unidentified electrical faults. Daniel blamed the landlord, whose ignored citations were buried in a file drawer, and the system that let him walk away. After the funeral, Daniel turned in his paramedic uniform, took the warehouse job, and promised his son Noah he wasn't going anywhere ever again. No more running into burning buildings, no more fighting City Hall. Just clock in, clock out, keep the rent paid and the lights on. He kept that promise for almost 3 years. He learned to measure his life in small, steady routines, burnt toast on Monday mornings, Little League practice on Tuesdays, grocery runs with coupons on Saturdays. Noah was 10 now, all elbows and big questions still waking some nights from dreams that smelled like smoke. On a rain-soaked Thursday, father and son were at the county clinic waiting for Noah's asthma checkup when Daniel saw her. She was maybe 29, with dark hair twisted into a messy bun, one leg strapped into a metal brace that ran from thigh to ankle. Pregnant enough that getting out of a chair took planning. She stood in the crowded waiting room holding a clipboard while people stared at their phones and let the seats stay full. When she shifted her weight and winced, nobody moved. Daniel watched her bite her lip, eyes shining, and something in the slump of her shoulders looked all too familiar. He nudged Noah. "Hey, buddy," he murmured, getting to his feet. "Let's give up our seats." That simple choice to stand up in a room where everyone else looked away was how Daniel met the woman whose fight would drag him back into the one place he swore he'd never return: a room with a judge, a man in a navy suit, and a chance to finally say out loud what had been burning in his chest since the night his whole world went up in flames. Daniel didn't mean to get involved beyond offering his chair. That was the plan. A small kindness, nothing more. But as the clinic visit unfolded, it became clear that life had other plans for him. The woman, her name was Marisol Reyes, sat stiffly in the seat Daniel and Noah had given up. Her clipboard trembled in her hands. She kept trying to tuck a stray curl behind her ear, but it fell forward every time, like it refused to obey the rest of her. Noah sat beside Daniel, swinging his feet, watching her with the kind of wide-eyed worry only a child can show without embarrassment. When her name was called, she rose slowly, bracing herself on the armrest, adjusting the metal brace on her leg with practiced movements. She gave Daniel a small nod before following the nurse down the hall. Noah tugged his sleeve. "Dad," he whispered, "she looked like you did. After, you know." Daniel swallowed hard. "Yeah, buddy," he murmured. "I know." They finished the appointment and were heading out when they heard voices down the hall, sharp, annoyed voices followed by a choked plea. I'm on the list," Marisol said. "They told me I'd qualify." Daniel stopped. He didn't want to listen. He didn't want to get pulled in, but something in the tremble of her voice made him round the corner. Two clinic administrators stood in front of her, in their crisp navy polos, arms crossed. One held a clipboard. The other's expression was the tight, impatient type Daniel knew too well from his warehouse supervisors. The expression of someone who already decided the outcome before you opened your mouth. "We don't have time for this," the woman with the clipboard said. "Housing assistance is for tenants with valid paperwork. You don't have it." "I submitted it," Marisol said. 3 times, online and in person. The administrator cut her off. "Ms. Reyes, we can't keep going over this. The landlord says you're behind on rent, and without stable housing, we can't approve assistance for a high-risk pregnancy." Marisol's hands clenched at her sides. "The elevator's been out for weeks. I've asked them to fix it. I can't make it down the stairs fast enough with the brace, and I missed work because that's not our issue," the administrator said quickly. "Your landlord filed a complaint. He says you refused maintenance entry." "That's not true," Marisol said, her voice cracking. "He wants me out so he can renovate. He said people like me, Ms. Reyes." The woman sighed. "This is not a debate." Daniel felt the familiar heat flare in his chest, the same heat he felt the night he watched the landlord from his old building walk out of a wrongful death settlement, adjusting his tie like he'd negotiated a discount on office furniture. But this wasn't his fight. He wasn't supposed to do this anymore. Noah looked up at him, eyes wide. "Dad, she needs help." And something inside Daniel, something he thought he'd buried under routines and early bedtimes, shifted. He stepped forward. "Is everything all right here?" The administrators turned, surprised. Marisol looked down at her hands, embarrassed. The clipboard woman narrowed her eyes. "This is a private matter." Daniel kept his tone level. "It doesn't sound private. It sounds like someone's getting pushed around." The second administrator laughed under his breath. "Sir, unless you're Ms. Reyes's legal representative." "I'm not," Daniel said. "Just someone who's seen this kind of thing before." "Well then, but I heard you say her landlord filed a complaint. Is his last name Crane?" Both administrators exchanged a quick look. "That was answer enough." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Because if it is, I'd double-check any complaint he files. Man's been cited for safety violations at half his properties." The clipboard woman bristled. "Sir, we can't take information from who?" Daniel asked quietly. "A forklift driver, a widower with a kid, someone who doesn't wear a badge or a blazer. Go ahead, say it." Her face flickered, caught between offense and discomfort. Marisol stared at Daniel, stunned by the sudden shift in the room. "We've followed our procedures," the administrator said coolly. "If Ms. Reyes has concerns, she can file an appeal." "Weeks," Marisol whispered. Appeals take weeks. Daniel knew what weeks meant when you were broke, scared, and alone. Weeks were the difference between staying afloat and going under. He exhaled slowly. He shouldn't get involved. He already knew he was going to. "Come on, Noah," he said. "Let's get to the truck." But when he turned, he looked at Marisol. "Do you have a way to get home? I took the bus," she murmured, embarrassed. "2 transfers." Daniel nodded once. "We're heading that way. We'll give you a lift." For a second, she didn't respond. People rarely offered her anything but pity or impatience. Finally, she whispered, "Thank you." They walked out into the cold drizzle, Noah hustling ahead to open the truck's rear door. Daniel helped Marisol in, carefully making sure the brace didn't catch. She flinched at a sudden twinge in her leg, but tried to hide it behind a tight smile. As he started the engine, she folded her hands in her lap, silent for a long moment. "You didn't have to step in back there," she said softly. "I know." "Why did you?" Daniel tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "Because I've been in rooms where people made decisions about my life without looking me in the eye. Didn't feel right watching it happen to someone else." Her eyes softened. "Not many people say things like that. Not many people have lost as much as I have," Daniel said before he could stop himself. A shadow crossed her face. Empathy without intrusion. "I'm sorry," she murmured. He nodded once, grateful she didn't ask for details. They drove through the city's worn neighborhoods, brick buildings with peeling paint, corner stores, with flickering signs, bus stops crowded with people trying to stay dry under tiny awnings. When Daniel pulled up to Marisol's building, he wasn't surprised. The elevator out of order sign hung crookedly on the door. The steps to the entry were uneven, patched sloppily with cement. "Do they expect you to climb those?" he asked. "I manage," she said, simply, bracing herself to swing her leg around. Daniel was out of the truck before she could finish the sentence. He helped her up each step, steady and silent. Inside the hallway was narrow, the carpet worn thin. A faint smell of mildew clung to the walls. When they reached her unit, she hesitated with her key. "It's not much." Daniel shook his head. "Doesn't have to be much, just has to be safe." She pushed open the door, and Daniel's stomach tightened. The place wasn't just small or outdated. It was dangerous. A water stain spread across the ceiling like a bruise. An exposed electrical outlet sat inches above a baseboard heater. The smoke detector dangled by a single wire. The window frame was swollen from moisture, and the lock didn't fully slide into place. "How long's it been like this?" Daniel asked quietly. She swallowed. "I've submitted work orders. They say they'll send someone. They never do." "You paying full rent?" "Of course." Daniel inhaled slowly, fighting the urge to punch the wall. Marisol tried to laugh it off. "It's okay. I'm used to making do." "Used to." Those 2 words landed in Daniel's chest like lead. He knelt by the baseboard heater and checked the wiring. "This is a fire hazard." She stiffened, noticing the shift in his tone. "Is it dangerous?" "Yeah," he said honestly. "It is." Noah hovered in the doorway, hugging his jacket, looking small. He knew that tone. It was the same voice Daniel used when the world stopped being fair. Marisol sank into her couch, suddenly looking more exhausted than before. "The clinic won't help me. Housing won't help me. I'm behind at work because of the appointments. I feel like I'm drowning." Daniel sat back on his heels and looked around again. He wasn't wearing a uniform anymore. He didn't carry a badge or a radio or a stethoscope, but he still recognized an emergency when he saw one. "Do you have family nearby?" he asked. Her eyes flickered. "No, not anymore." What about the baby's father? A bitter, humorless smile. You heard enough at the clinic. He wants me gone before the baby gets here. Says I'm a liability. Daniel's jaw locked. Liability. He heard that word in the warehouse once, the way management used it about workers who complained about unsafe pallets. He hated that word. Noah stepped closer to Marisol. I'm sorry they were mean to you, he said softly. They shouldn't talk to you like that. Her face crumpled, not in pity, but in the kind of quiet gratitude only a child's honesty can spark. Thank you, sweetheart. Daniel rose slowly, brushing dust from his hands. Look, he said I can fix some of this. Not everything, but some. Her eyes widened. I can't pay, I didn't ask you to. She stared at him like she didn't know how to process kindness that didn't come with strings attached. I'll grab my tools from the truck, he said. You and Noah stay inside. It's cold out. But as he turned toward the door, a voice boomed down the hallway. Well, look who's letting herself fall behind again. Daniel froze. A man in khakis and a button-down stood halfway down the hall, tapping a folder against his palm. He had the polished smile of someone who practiced looking sympathetic in a mirror and got it wrong every time. Ms. Reyes, he said brightly, we really need to talk about your account. Marisol instantly stiffened. The landlord, of course. Victor Crane, the same name from the clinic. I told you I'd have the rent by Friday, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. He tisked, shaking his head. See, that's the problem. You always say Friday. Then Friday becomes next Friday. Daniel stepped into the hallway before he realized he was moving. That leak in her ceiling, he said, his voice low. You planning on fixing it? Crane blinked, surprised at the interruption. He looked Daniel up and down, took in the worn jacket and work boots. And who are you? Her handyman. He laughed like it was a punchline. Noah's face fell. Marisol went pale. Daniel felt the pressure building, the slow boil he'd kept contained for 3 long years. I'm someone who knows what happens when landlords ignore safety problems, Daniel said softly. Crane smirked, yeah. Well, someone like you should mind his own business. I deal with tenants. You fix whatever it is you fix. A silence fell over the hallway. Something big was coming. The kind of confrontation Daniel had spent years avoiding. He could feel the ground shifting, the air thickening. Crane stepped forward, lowering his voice. And between us, he said, once, she's out, these units will rent for triple. So do yourself a favor, pal, don't get attached. Marisol's breath hitched. Noah's small hand slipped into Daniel's. And inside Daniel's chest, the last of his restraint burned away like paper in flame. Crane didn't expect Daniel to step closer. He didn't expect the calm in Daniel's eyes to harden into something colder, steadier, born from a place far deeper than anger. But the moment he smirked about not getting attached, something in the hallway changed. Even Noah felt it. He pressed himself against the wall, watching his father the way a kid watches a storm rolling in. Crane tapped his folder against his palm, again slower this time. Look, I don't want trouble, he said, though his tone suggested the opposite. I just need this unit cleared, renovation scheduled, permits already filed. She's past due, paperwork's done. She's out by the end of the month. Marisol's breath hitched. That's not what you told me last week. I told you whatever I needed to get you to stop leaving messages, Crane said, shrugging. This neighborhood's turning over. You can't afford to live here anymore. That's life. Daniel felt heat rising in his chest. Life. That's life. That was the same phrase the fire inspector used 3 years ago when they told him the wiring issues weren't conclusive, and the owner followed procedures even though half the hallway smelled like burned insulation for weeks before the fire. Crane pushed past Daniel and rapped his knuckles on Marisol's doorframe. 30 days, he said to her. No extensions. He glanced back at Daniel with an oily smile. And don't play hero. You'll just make things harder on her. Noah flinched at the word hero. Daniel stepped forward before he realized it. Leave, he said quietly. Crane's smile faded. Excuse me, you heard me. Crane's expression hardened. I can call security. Or the police. Do it, Daniel said. But you're the one with exposed wiring and a broken smoke detector in a unit you're still charging full rent for. Let's see how that works out. For the first time, doubt flickered across Crane's face. But before he could respond, a sharp popping sound came from somewhere inside Marisol's apartment, like wood giving way under pressure. They all turned. A second pop, then a soft hiss. Daniel knew that sound. The old heater. He didn't think he moved. He pushed past Crane and stepped inside just as the baseboard heater sputtered again, sparks flicking out like tiny fireflies. One landed on the edge of an old curtain. It smoldered. Then it bloomed. Flame raced up the fabric faster than anyone expected. Marisol gasped and stumbled backward, her brace clanking against the floor. Noah yelped behind Daniel. Crane swore and rushed down the hall. Everything happened at once. Daniel scanned the room automatically, just like he used to when running into burning apartments with nothing but gloves and gut instinct. Fire on the curtain. Low smoke. No sprinklers. Dry paneling above. Furniture clustered too close. And Marisol, one leg braced, belly-heavy movement limited. If that fire spread, she'd never get out in time. Dad. Noah's voice trembled from the doorway. Daniel's adrenaline surged so hard he could taste copper. Stay outside, he yelled. And don't move. He grabbed the closest thing he could, a threadbare throw blanket from the couch, and lunged toward the burning curtain. Heat slapped him in the face. Smoke clawed at his throat. He wrapped the blanket around his arms and slapped it against the flames again and again, feeling the heat through the thin fabric. The curtain tore. A chunk of burning material fell to the floor, igniting the carpet. He stomped it out with his boot, coughing hard. Behind him, Marisol swayed dangerously. I can't. Daniel, I've got you, he said without turning. Just stay back. The initial flames died, but embers crawled upward toward the wooden beam above the window. If that caught, the whole wall would go. Daniel grabbed a metal trash can, dumped it, and smashed it against the remaining flames. Wood cracked, embers scattered. He smashed again, and finally the fire gave up, curling into smoke and charred cloth. For a moment, the apartment was silent, except for his ragged breathing. Then Daniel turned and saw Marisol gripping the wall, her face ashen, sweat glistening at her hairline. She looked like she was seconds from passing out. He rushed over. Sit down now. I'm fine, she whispered, which was untrue in every possible way. You're not. He helped her back to the couch, checking her pulse, her breathing, her balance. She was shaken, but conscious. And the baby. Is he okay? Daniel asked. She pressed a trembling hand to her stomach. I think so. I think so. Daniel blew out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Noah scrambled inside, eyes huge. Dad, are you okay? Daniel knelt and put both hands on his son's shoulders. I'm okay. I promise. Noah looked past him to the charred wall. It could have spread. I know, Daniel whispered. And he did know. More than anyone. He knew how fast flames moved when wiring went ignored and landlords cut corners. He knew how quickly a family could lose everything. And he knew with a certainty that hit him square in the chest that if he hadn't been there, Not just in this moment, but in any moment, Marisol would have been alone with a fire she couldn't outrun. This wasn't just a hazard. It was nearly a tragedy. Again. Too close. Too familiar. Outside in the hallway, Crane reappeared, wide-eyed and breathless. He pointed at the scorched wall. "What did you do?" Daniel stood up slowly. "What did I do? I stopped your building from going up in smoke." Crane's face went red. "You caused damage. That's tenant destruction. She'll pay for this." Marisol flinched like she'd been struck. Daniel stepped forward, shoulders squared. "She'll pay for your negligence, your broken heater, your busted wiring." "You don't know what you're talking about," Crane snapped. Daniel reached into the heater's housing, pulled away the melted panel, and exposed the frayed, blackened wiring beneath. "This," Daniel said, "is exactly what caused a fatal apartment fire 3 years ago on the west side." Crane opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Daniel kept going. "I know because my wife died in it." The hallway went silent. Marisol stared at him, stunned. Noah stepped closer, leaning into his father's side. Crane swallowed. "Look, I didn't know." "Because you didn't care," Daniel said. "About safety. About tenants. About her child. About anything but your profit." Crane straightened quickly, trying to recover his authority. "If you think you can blame me, I don't need to blame you," Daniel said. "I need 3 things, and you're going to give them to me." Crane blinked. "What?" Daniel held up a finger. 1 immediate repair orders on every safety violation in this unit dated today. A 2nd finger. 2 confirmation that any eviction notice is frozen until those repairs are completed. A 3rd. 3 written acknowledgement of the heating malfunction so she's not held responsible for the damage. Crane scoffed. "You think I'm going to sign anything?" Daniel stepped closer until they were nearly nose to nose. "Yes, I do." Crane wavered. He looked at the burned wall, then at Daniel, then at the hallway where several tenants now watched with phones out, recording everything. The shift was visible. The power he held wasn't power anymore. Not in this hallway. Not after what everyone just saw. Crane's jaw tightened. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll send the paperwork." "No," Daniel said. "You'll text your maintenance supervisor right now, and write the rest before you leave the building." Crane hesitated, then pulled out his phone. He typed. Sent. Typed again. Sent. Then he glared. "I'll deliver the paperwork, but this doesn't change anything long-term. It changes everything," Daniel said. "You just don't know it yet." With that, Crane stormed down the hall, muttering curses under his breath. Daniel turned back to Marisol. "You okay?" She nodded shakily. Tears filled her eyes. "You didn't have to do all that." He knelt beside her. "Yeah," he said softly. "I did." Because he remembered a night when no one stepped up, when no one fought hard enough, when no one said she deserves better. And he wasn't going to let history repeat itself, not with this woman, not with her unborn child, not with his own son watching. In the doorway, Noah whispered, "Dad, you saved her." Daniel placed a hand on his son's head. "We helped her," he corrected gently. "We don't do this alone." But inside, Daniel knew the truth. Something big had shifted today. He had stepped into a fire again. Not flames, but a different kind of danger. One with legal consequences. One with retaliation. One with men like Crane who didn't back down easily. He had crossed a line. A line he knew would bring everything to a head very soon. A line that meant the truth, the real truth, couldn't stay buried anymore. And somewhere deep inside him, a quiet voice whispered that this was only the beginning. The smoke had barely thinned before neighbors poured into the hallway. Doors cracked open. Faces appeared, wide-eyed, frightened, whispering to one another as they stared at the scorched wall. The charred curtain scraps, and Daniel kneeling beside Marisol like a man who'd just come back from the edge. A few tenants held phones up, recording him silently. Not like gossip, not like nosy spectators. More like witnesses trying to understand how the quiet guy with the worn work boots had just stopped a fire with nothing but instinct and will. Noah clung to Daniel's side, still shaking. Marisol wiped her eyes, breath uneven, trying to sit upright despite the tremor in her hands. Daniel just sat there for a moment, forearm braced against his knee, staring at the ruined heater. He could feel the heat still lingering in the metal. Could smell the faint metallic sweetness that always followed an electrical burn. He hadn't felt that smell in years. Not since the night he lost everything. A neighbor, a heavy-set older man named Garland, shifted from foot to foot before clearing his throat. "Son," he said softly. "How'd you know to move that quick?" Daniel didn't answer. The question wasn't simple, and the truth wasn't something he'd said out loud in a long, long time. Another tenant, a young woman with her hair tied in a bright scarf, whispered, "He wasn't just reacting. He was checking structural spread airflow, like he knew what fire does." Crane, who'd been hovering at the far end of the hall, pretending to make important phone calls, froze mid-step. His eyes darted between Daniel and the growing crowd. "What are you all talking about?" he snapped. He hit the wall with a trash can. "It wasn't some heroic, 'shut up, Victor,'" someone muttered. Crane bristled, but the authority he'd walked in with was gone, burned away like the curtain. Daniel finally stood, slowly, shoulders stiff, breathing tight. He felt the weight inside him, the story he never told, the truth that lived under everything he'd done today. Marisol looked up at him. "Daniel, how did you know what to do?" Her voice wasn't accusing. It was something gentler, something afraid to hope. Daniel swallowed hard. "Because I've done it before." The hallway quieted. No footsteps, no whispers, no phones tapping, just stillness. "My wife," he said, his voice low but steady, "died in an apartment fire 3 years ago. Wiring issues, blocked exits, no working alarms. I tried to save her, but the heat, the smoke." His jaw tightened. Everything failed at once. Marisol's eyes filled. Garland lowered his head. "I stopped being a paramedic after that." Daniel continued. "Stopped running into burning buildings. I promised Noah I'd never put myself at risk like that again." Noah tugged his sleeve gently. Daniel put a hand over his. "But I smelled that heater when I walked in today," he said quietly. "And I knew exactly what was coming." A woman in the crowd gasped softly. Crane's face went pale. "That wiring didn't fray this morning," Daniel said. "It's been failing for months." Crane opened his mouth to argue, but Daniel kept going. "And when someone you love dies because a landlord ignored warnings, you don't ever forget the signs." For the first time since the fire years ago, Daniel didn't feel like he was drowning when he said those words. He felt clear. Marisol stared at him like she was seeing him differently, seeing the loss behind the strength, the history behind the instinct. Noah leaned against him, whispering, "I didn't know you remembered all of it." Daniel's throat tightened. "I remember every second." Crane took a shaky step forward. "Look, okay, maybe the wiring's a little old, but that doesn't mean—" "Don't," Daniel said, turning toward him. "Not this time." The crowd shifted. Tenants moved closer to Daniel, away from Crane. A woman from across the hall folded her arms. Victor, that could have killed her. Garland shook his head. Or the baby. The scarf-haired young woman pointed her phone at Crane. I've got your inspection failures from last winter right here. Crane stiffened. I'm not discussing this in a hallway. It's where we live. Someone shot back. And where you don't fix anything, another added. Daniel felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense that maybe he wasn't the only one who was tired of being quiet. Crane's voice wobbled. Let's not overreact. Daniel stepped forward. Not hostile, not threatening, just steady. We're not overreacting, he said. We're responding. Crane backed up a step. Daniel looked at the tenants. How many of you have had leaks that never got fixed? Hands rose, rodents that never got addressed. More hands. No hot water for days at a time, nearly every hand. Crane's composure cracked. This is getting blown out of proportion. Daniel tilted his head slightly. A pregnant woman almost died in a fire today because you didn't want to replace a heater. That's not proportion. That's negligence. A murmur rippled through the hallway. And then the scarf-haired woman spoke softly, almost reverently. You weren't just reacting, she said to Daniel. You were leading, like you'd done it 100 times. Daniel exhaled. I've led people out of buildings collapsing around them, pulled strangers from burning stairwells. I've breathed more smoke than anyone should. He paused. I walked away from all that because losing one person broke me so completely. I didn't know how to stand back up. Marisol's breath caught. But you did. Daniel looked at her, and for the first time since his wife died, he let himself feel how true that was. I did, he whispered. Right here. Today. Noah squeezed his hand so tightly Daniel felt it in his chest. Crane stared at him, finally speechless. His earlier arrogance evaporated into something small and rattled. Daniel turned back to the crowd. You don't have to live in fear. You don't have to let this continue. There are legal aid groups that take cases like this, tenant organizations that will help. And now his eyes landed on Crane. You have witnesses and video. The hallway buzzed with new energy. Hope, anger, possibility. Crane sputtered, I'll fix the heater. All right, I'll get someone to... No, Daniel said. You'll bring an electrician, a licensed one. Today. Crane opened his mouth, then shut it. A neighbor added, and you're fixing the alarms in our hallway too. And the stairwell light, another said. And the mold in 2B Crane threw up his hands. Okay, I'll send maintenance. No, Daniel repeated. You'll hire professionals, and we'll all be here when they come. The shift in power was unmistakable. Crane no longer controlled the building. The tenants, empowered by the man they underestimated, now stood together. Daniel turned back to Marisol. We need to get you checked by a doctor. She nodded weakly. I can't afford another appointment. I can, Daniel said. And we're going. But you don't... I insisted, he said gently. Noah stepped beside her. I'll help you down the stairs. Marisol laughed a little through her tears. You're very strong. Noah beamed. My dad says courage isn't loud. It just shows up. Daniel's breath hitched. When had he said that maybe he hadn't? Maybe Noah had just pieced it together from the life they'd lived. The scarf-haired woman looked at Daniel. You're not just a forklift driver. He hesitated. No. I used to be more. You still are, she said softly. And that was the moment, quiet but seismic, when he realized something else. People weren't looking at him with pity or confusion anymore. They were looking at him with respect, with something like trust. Marisol gripped his hand. "Daniel, thank you." He shook his head. "I didn't save your apartment." "No," she whispered. "You saved my life." He didn't argue. For once, he let himself accept it. As they moved toward the stairs, Crane called after him weakly. Mr. Miller, I'll have paperwork for you tomorrow. Maybe we could talk privately about Daniel didn't even turn around." "You'll bring the paperwork to the tenants," he said. "All of them." Crane swallowed hard. Everyone heard it. Daniel walked down the hall beside Marisol and Noah the tenants parting around them like a tide. When they reached the stairwell, Marisol paused. "You could have died in there," she whispered. Daniel met her eyes. "I promised my wife I'd protect people. I failed her once." His voice softened. "I won't fail again." She nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time you stop hiding who you are." Daniel didn't answer, but deep inside he knew she was right. What he did today wasn't an accident. It wasn't luck. It wasn't impulse. It was the part of him he'd buried, the part that knew how to run toward danger, not away from it. And now that part was awake again. At the bottom of the stairs, Daniel stepped out into the cold air and looked up at the building, the cracked windows, the sagging brick, the dim hallway light barely visible from outside. This wasn't just about a faulty heater, or an eviction, or one scared tenant. It was bigger. And for the first time, Daniel felt the weight of what he'd started not with dread, but with resolve. Something was coming. Something that would force him to choose between the quiet life he built and the man he used to be. And he already knew which one he'd choose. By the next morning, news of the near fire had moved through the building like electricity. Tenants Daniel had never spoken to knocked on Marisol's door with offers of food, rides, phone numbers for tenant advocacy groups. People who used to hurry past her now paused, asked how she was feeling, spoke to her belly like the baby mattered to them too. And every time someone asked how the fire got put out, their eyes drifted toward Daniel. Crane came back with paperwork in a manila folder, shoulders slumped, no trace of the smugness he wore the day before. He apologized, not gracefully, not eloquently, but in the only way men like him know how. A stumbling, mumbled admission that he should have handled things differently. Daniel didn't gloat. He just nodded once and turned the papers toward Marisol so she could read them herself. She signed nothing until she understood every word. Crane waited silently, eyes on the floor. By the time the electrician arrived, a loose semicircle of tenants had gathered in the hall. They weren't there to cause trouble. They were there because they now understood they were allowed to expect better. And because one man's courage had reminded them what they deserved. When the electrician saw the wiring, he whistled low. "This isn't just out of code. This is criminal." Crane flinched, and something in the power balance shifted permanently. Marisol looked at Daniel with a fragile, grateful smile. "I don't know why you were here at the exact moment everything fell apart," she said. "But I'm glad you were." Daniel lowered his gaze. Maybe things fall apart so the right people can walk in. Noah nodded as if he'd heard a secret truth. A week later, Marisol asked him to come with her to the clinic follow-up appointment. Not because she couldn't manage the steps her building had finally repaired the elevator, but because she didn't want to face the system alone. When they stepped into the clinic lobby, the same two administrators from before straightened as though they'd been waiting. Their expressions weren't dismissive this time. They were cautious, respectful. Ms. Reyes, the clipboard woman said, approaching slowly. I want to apologize for how we handled your case last week. We watched the video of the incident. We didn't know your building was unsafe. She hesitated, glancing at Daniel. And we didn't know the, gentleman assisting you had your safety in mind in a way none of us did. Daniel almost laughed. He didn't. But the look Noah gave him said everything. We've reopened your file, the administrator continued. You qualify for emergency support, and we've placed a hold on any discrimination reports connected to your housing situation. Marisol pressed her hand to her heart. Thank you, she whispered. That means everything. Daniel didn't speak, but he stood beside her, and for the first time since he quit the paramedic service, he didn't feel small walking into a government office. He didn't feel like a man running from the past. He felt like someone standing exactly where he needed to. 2 months later, the building held its first tenants meeting in years. Garland brought folding chairs. Others brought cookies, lemonade notepads. Someone brought a bright orange toolbox and placed it in front, like a ceremonial offering. Daniel Garland said, clearing his throat, "We want you to take this." Daniel blinked. What for? You're the only one who's ever stood up for all of us, Garland said. We want you to be the tenant rep, the one who deals with the landlord, the inspectors, the city. There's going to be renovation grants, safety reviews, and, well, we trust you. Daniel looked around the room, stunned. People he barely knew nodded at him with quiet certainty. Noah elbowed him gently. See, Dad? You didn't stop being a helper. You just forgot for a while. Marisol, sitting beside him with her feet propped up and a hand on her belly, smiled softly. Take it, she said. Some people lead because they want the power. You lead because you want people safe. His chest tightened. Not with grief this time, something closer to relief, like a door he'd kept locked, finally opened. All right, Daniel said. I'll do it. The room broke into applause. 8 months after the fire scare, Marisol's daughter was born, tiny, loud, and healthy. She had a full head of dark hair and a habit of gripping Daniel's finger like she'd been waiting for it. Marisol named her Esperanza. Hope. Daniel cried harder than he expected. Even Noah cried a little, pretending it was the fluorescent lights making his eyes itch. Crane's repairs had turned into full renovations. The city forced him into mandatory safety compliance, and rumors said he was looking to sell the building entirely. He never raised his voice in the hallway again. And he never made eye contact with Daniel. The clinic administrators changed, too. They started leaving printed resources in the lobby, hosting workshops, building bridges that should have existed years ago. But the biggest change was in Daniel himself. He didn't return to being a paramedic. He didn't have to. What he became instead was something quieter, but just as important. The man the whole building went to when something felt wrong. The man who knew how to speak up without screaming. The man who showed up every single time because showing up was the thing he'd been built for long before he lost Emily and long before he saved Marisol. He rebuilt something inside himself without realizing it. Not the fearless hero he once was. Not the ghost of a man he'd become. Something new. Something steadier. On a late summer evening, Daniel sat outside on the stoop while Noah drew chalk stars on the sidewalk. Inside, Marisol rocked baby Esperanza to sleep, humming softly. Garland approached with 2 iced teas and handed him one. You know, the older man said, lowering himself onto the step with a grunt. People like us don't usually get second chances. Not real ones. Daniel nodded. I know, But when they come, Garland added, we better make the most of them. Daniel took a long sip, watching Noah trace the outline of a comet. I'm trying, he said. You're doing, Garland corrected. The sun sank behind the buildings, throwing long golden streaks across the cracked pavement. Children laughed somewhere down the block. A TV droned softly through an open window. Life kept moving. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt like he was moving with it, not chasing it, not fighting it, not hiding from it, just living it. Sometimes courage isn't the moment you run into the flames. Sometimes it's the moment you choose to step back into the world after the smoke finally clears.